I was always so worried that if I didn't get every deal done when the broker wanted me to or when the client said they had to, I was going to lose all my business in the future.
Mistakes happen. It is just a fact of life. There will be mistakes. The agents, they know they're not supposed to draft their own language. They know that. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Real Estate Show. I'm Tiffany Weber, real estate attorney in Mooresville, North Carolina, Huntersville, and Denver, North Carolina. And today I am so excited for our guest. We have another attorney here, Justin Kazepis. Welcome to the show.
Tiffany, thank you for having me. It's amazing to be here. Big fan of the show, by the way, too.
Well, I'm a big fan of yours.
No, I'm a big fan of yours.
What's wild is after having recorded so many of these, I don't really get nervous anymore, but I have a radio host and attorney. I'm like, you're all the things that I wish I could be, right?
No, you're too kind.
So I know a little bit about, the things that you're into now and the things that you've done in your career, which have been really astounding. And, I've followed your practice because you were innovating in the area beyond what a lot of real estate attorneys were doing. So take some time, tell us a little bit about what are you doing now and how did you get there?
So currently owner of WSIC News, a 76-year-old radio station that started in Statesville but covers all of Lake Norman all the way to Center City, Charlotte, and then also now Lake Norman Woman Magazine I'm the publisher of as well. Funny road to get here. Kind of all stems back to real estate, though, which is kind of wild. So
yeah, I love that. Now talk to me a little bit about, the real estate show. Obviously, we're talking about real estate. We're talking about real estate law. I first knew you as real estate attorney, doing the thing that I'm doing today. So tell me a little bit about your experience as a real estate attorney. Do you miss doing closings all day, every day?
There are days I miss the fast-paced, what's happening in the market, being involved, high-level, questions of, hey, can we do this or not in a transaction? Because even though we're all forms-based, every transaction is unique, right? You know that. But so started off as a real estate broker, became an attorney in 2015, hung my own shingle, and then exited my practice in 2021. But it was a fun ride for sure.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
And it's one of the things that I'm sure many law firm owners dream of is a successful exit from their practice. And the practice is still going. So you built up a foundation that they were able to continue on, which is awesome. There's a lot of probably 75-year-old attorneys that are like, man, I need to talk to this guy. How did he do that? But I actually wanted to talk to you today about some of the things that you probably don't miss. We're going to call it 10 Things I Hate About You, real estate version. So we have talked about a list of things that maybe aren't the most fun in real estate. And I bet we have some good ideas for how to overcome them. So the first one I have on the list of 10 Things I Hate About You, real estate version is emergencies that don't have to be emergencies. You probably dealt with those a time or two.
Oh, yeah. You get the phone call. It needs to be solved right now.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's a nothing burger.
Absolutely. Or the rush closing because the agent forgot to send you the contract when they first went under contract 45 days ago and they need to close next week. Didn't have to be an emergency. The easiest way to overcome that is communicate.
So key. Communication is literally will save umpteen headaches across your entire career if you're just willing to have a conversation.
Yeah. And the idea that, some things that we'll get calls from agents late at night because if it's not finished before they go to bed, really the issue is they're not going to be able to sleep because they're worried about it. But the reality is most of the times these problems will take other parties to be involved, and we're, contingent upon their working hours as well. We can't just force the lender to wake up and, handle something this very instant. But a lot of times because we're attorneys, we're looked at like we have a magic wand. So
the saying of the golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rules. And that was always the lender. I always like that one too.
Yeah, I like that. Sure. I have actually never heard that, and I'm going to write that down because I really like it. This one the next one kind of goes together with the unrealistic timelines. I mean, I'm sure you probably have a million stories like this, but it's an easy cash closing. It's Monday. Can we close Friday? I mean, why can't we do that?
Because likely in that scenario, while they say it's cash, it's probably a private money deal. There's probably an estate involved, and the seller happens to be overseas in a country that is not recognized by the international group that accepts U.S. notaries. So that's probably just an example.
The perfect storm. Yeah. And probably some of those heirs are getting divorced too. Yeah. Just keep piling it on. And the other thing is, did you have in-house title? Did you do title work yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. So that helps. I mean, we do that as well, but it's just like remodeling a house. We don't know what we're going to find until we open up the walls.
Never know.
We don't know if we're going to get a prior policy or not. We might be looking back 60, 80 years. And that's not the only thing we do. And it's not the only file we have. So while there certainly could be some scenarios where on a Monday morning we get a file and we could close it Friday, all the stars have to align. Title has to be clean. Everybody's got to be where they need to be when they need to be there. And it better really be cash. All of those things have to line up. But the title work alone, depending on what you find, might prevent that from happening on Friday.
And a lot of times too, because so much of it is relationship, and there's brokers. There are a lot of great brokers out there. It's fun to bash on the bad brokers, but there's a lot of great brokers out here that when you get the call and okay, I've worked with this broker before. I know they're organized. This is a unique scenario for a request. Yeah. That's a very different scenario than, okay, this is a broker I've never worked with.
Yeah.
I'm getting a phone call on a Monday afternoon begging me and telling me that, hey, I have a lot of business to give you if you do this, right? A lot of those incentive mindsets, right? But in reality, the average broker does 4 deals a year. And so you've got to balance that but at the end of the day, you as an attorney, you've got to provide competent legal service to every client, because once that deed gets recorded, it's the attorney most of the time who's on the hook.
Yeah. Yeah. And that also kind of reminds me of the relationship matters a lot. When you said that, it reminded me of what we just said before about the emergencies that don't have to be. When you cry wolf too many times, then we start to, not everything can be an emergency, right? Like if 10 out of 10 times you contact us, there's a fire. We're going to start looking to see if maybe it's the person reporting the fire that's the problem, Like, is it really a fire, or are you just like, you've got some issues with your own time management or deal management, and we start to scrutinize a little bit and, maybe prioritize other people that we know we can rely on their word. I mean, just being honest, it's, now the other thing that this one is kind of tough, and if I had to guess, it's probably one of the things you miss the least. It's kind of like the lack of accountability or control over the process, because even though we're the closing attorney, we've got our scope. There's only so much we can do. We can't generate a loan package. Like if the lender is not responsive or the client hasn't gotten the stuff to the lender so that the lender can do their job, there's so much that goes into it. But because we're the closing attorney, we're looked at if it doesn't close on time, it's obviously your fault, Talk to me about that a little bit.
That was one of the hardest every day, because it could happen any day too. Yeah. It's not like you foresee, this particular closing 3 weeks from now I know is going to be the problem. Yeah. It's you come in for 9 a.m. and by 3 o'clock, right, your day is unraveled because of all the moving parts. Yeah. I think the managing of expectations in a transaction, especially in a post-COVID world right now, right? Because COVID changed everything as far as timeline. Everybody wanted to close immediately. Yeah. You're talking about the percentage change of due diligence fee, earnest money deposits, sales price, all
so
of it
much
shifting.
is on the line.
Oh my goodness. And so the tension was so high. And everyone just would go to, the attorney knows. The attorney knows. Because, and in reality, and for good reason, with arguably the most training in a transaction that understands from the legal perspective of what's going on. Yeah. But I would say, unlike the wonderful job you guys do here, not every attorney is also created equal as well, and just this reality. Yeah. And so finding that managing of expectations, I wish I could tell you that I mastered it. A lot of times it was, hey, you just got to take the grunt of the phone call, and that you didn't do anything wrong, but that's just the reality.
Sometimes you got to
life.
fall on your sword. We certainly haven't mastered it. We've got agents we've been dealing with for a long time and we're still like, they're calling you up and saying, why can't we close? I'm like, you know that your person did not give over any of their financials until 2 days ago, and we're supposed to close today. Like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And it's tough. It goes back to relationships. Some people you can have that conversation with, other people are not going to hear it.
Yeah.
They don't want anything other than, oh, you're so right. It's obviously my fault that all of these things are going wrong, and we'll get on it. And it's tough.
I'll say hopefully as a word of encouragement on that though. So as a broker prior to becoming an attorney, and then even as an attorney for years in the closing process, I was always so worried that if I didn't get every deal done when the broker wanted me to, or when the client said they had to, I was going to lose all my business in the future.
Yeah.
Nobody was ever going to call me again. Everyone was going to know and say that I was a terrible attorney.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I certainly made mistakes. Don't let me get that. I was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It never happened that I lost business in any long-term plan. Now, I may have lost relationships with particular brokers or vendors and things like that, referral partners, but I never lost out on all this business that I was so worried I was going to lose for being the one that, regardless of other people not being reasonable, I always wanted to be the reasonable one in the room.
Well, I can tell you the reason why. It's because you maintained your integrity. You weren't willing to compromise on that. So of course you're not going to lose business, because people will see that you're a man of integrity, and that's who they want to do business with. That makes perfect sense to me. But it is tough, like sometimes you just want to shake someone and say, hey, all of the pieces of the puzzle have to fit here, and some of the pieces weren't even in the box, So we're doing everything we can, and that's what we always strive to do as attorneys, to meet, make people happy, at least in real estate transactions. That's like the best part of it, is when people are happy at the closing table, but it requires cooperation.
And for the managing expectations as the attorney, it's so difficult too, because you're receiving a signed contract. So there's already some form of relationship between a broker and a client, at least you hope. There's hopefully a relationship between a broker and a lender if they're getting financing. There's hopefully a relationship with a home inspector. There's all these other relationships that exist, and you've never met your client before.
Right.
Most of the time as a closing attorney, you're not meeting the client until day of settlement. That's the first time you're meeting them. And so managing that is such a difficult process.
Yeah, it really is. And then the things that we are expected to clean up that we had no hand in creating, actually, let me skip ahead to that one. The DIYs that do more harm than good. The folks that, for whatever reason, don't want to pay an agent. They do their own contract. But it doesn't talk about what happens to that due diligence money, or what happens to that earnest money if you terminate, or, do you have to deliver good title? The DIY one-pager contracts, and when they fall apart, and it's more than just the deal that's falling apart, it's creating a dispute. So I'm curious, what's the worst one you've seen?
Yeah, I'd say the investor stuff got pretty bad. The one-page investor contracts, and I still get them for in the mail every once in a while, right? Like it's, we're a group out of California, and we want to offer you X dollars for your property with this parcel. Sign here on the line. Well, North Carolina, you've got consideration, you've got an offer, and you've got an acceptance. You've got a contract.
Yeah.
And so when that contract, then what was happening, these investors would file on the public record these notices that there was a contract in place, and that's a cloud on title, and you can't close that. And then everyone's looking at, well, it's not good. No, they never closed the deal. And title insurance, which is a huge part of the transaction, which most people have no idea about.
Yeah.
They say, we're not going to insure this with this sitting on title. Someone's going to make, why would you? Why would you take that risk? So people a lot of times just get ahead of themselves. They get excited, and then they want to act like it doesn't exist. Yeah. And that's the other side of it, really, where it really comes into play. It's one thing for something to happen, but you've just got to admit it and move forward. It's the best way to deal with it. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't even know if I answered your question.
You
right
did.
There. I just kind of went down a rabbit hole, but
no, you did. The investor stuff is a really good example. And a lot of times we'll get called in to, even if they're using a standard contract, the agents that they know they're not supposed to draft their own language. They know that. But they're trying to keep their client from spending money on legal fees. And so they do it anyway.
Or a lot of times you'll get the call from the broker, hey, draft this for us, just take care of it right now. And it's, 2 lines in an email that you can draft a legal addendum to a contract that's affecting a $2.5 million property, right? Like unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, like, and kind of cavalier about it all. You know, if what we did we could be cavalier about, then we probably wouldn't need, you know, none of us would need licenses to do it if it was just that simple and that quick. Occasionally it can be, but most of the time it's not.
I will say this too, for North Carolina, I am very grateful that we are an attorney closing state as compared to the title closing states, because that added layer of protection of just getting someone with a different perspective. People complain about fees and things like that.
We're still one of the least
expensive. That's the funny part about the conversation is because our title insurance rates are so much lower, even if you add in the attorney settlement fees into it, we're still less than a lot of these big states that are title closing states.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's true. And then even if it's not deal related, the DIYs will haunt us from the grave with the, I wrote my own will, or a non-estate planning attorney wrote a will. And this is
estates make me cringe. You're making me cringe right now thinking about those.
You know, sometimes I like it as like an intellectual exercise, but honestly, not all that often. The ones that kind of sting the most are the folks that think that only the executor needs to sign, and you look at the will and it's just not written that way, and title insurance isn't going to insure it, and they just don't understand. They, you know, like, well, Grandpa told me he wanted me to sell it, and I'm like, well, okay, you can executor, but all of these heirs and their spouses have to do it too.
The spouses on the heirs was a tough one because the spousal right, like just random right that spouses have in North Carolina, in essence, the way it's all worded, that was always a very tough conversation. Why does my spouse have to sign? They're not listening here. We're not together. Why would they have to? They have no right to it. It's like, yeah, they have a right.
Yeah.
A right that enough is by law
they have a right to share in your estate because you're still married and you can't
Yeah.
disinherit your spouse. And because you're still alive, that right is still, you know, like it's something as attorneys, like we could sit somebody down and go through the nerdy rabbit hole and explain it to them, but they don't really care. They're just mad. You know, they're not going to hear it.
Because they want to close in their time frame, right?
Yeah.
And again, that goes back to managing expectations, where the relationships that you have with brokers, right? And those reoccurring brokers that know what to expect, know how your workflow works. That's so important for them to acknowledge to a client, hey, we're going to get this done. It may, you know, maybe there's a couple of timeline ranges in this, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it can happen.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of something that we probably both, I think we probably agree on this. That like we strive to be the kind of attorney that if an agent comes to us and we tell them it can't happen or it's not possible, that they know it's not because of something personal to us. We're looking at the facts of the situation. We're looking at everything and we're saying it's just not doable, or you're looking at this the wrong way, and that they can kind of take that to the bank and know it's not because we're like, oh, we want to go on vacation, we just don't want to close it, you know? And I feel like that's kind of what we strive to be is, you know, if we say it can't be done, it's because it can't, and we've exhausted all of our options. So, you know, it's a challenge to try to get everybody on board. It's tough. Now this one, you suggested this, the mountains out of molehills.
Oh, yeah. So if you think about a scenario, let's say, for example, you're reviewing the final closing disclosure. You're gone back and forth with the lender a couple of times. Broker, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We won't say that they just didn't check their email for a couple of days. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that something was generally missed. Oh, here's another invoice that needs to get added, right? To some, that may seem like the end of the world. Oh, well, they already sent their wire, or, oh, they already did this. There are certainly ways that things can be worked through, multiple ways. What is it? Multiple ways to skin a cat, I think is what right? And that can be done in these types of scenarios. But a lot of times people jump to the conclusion because of TRID. It has to be right? These assumptions that are made and spread throughout the brokerage and closing community, that just doesn't have to be that way. Again, and I put this back to the best principle that you've brought up, communication.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back to that. So
yeah. And then you can have the client, they're like, well, if it wasn't on I'm not paying it. The attorney, you can pay it because you didn't put it on the... Okay, well, the thing that I'm not going to do, because I try to maintain relationships, is point out the fact that your agent never sent it to us. Yeah. You know, like that's something I'm trying to keep. We're on the same team here. We all want to close. I'm not going to try to point fingers at the closing table and say, well, if this person that you hired had done what they were supposed to do, we wouldn't be in that. We're not trying to do that. We're just trying to get to the solution.
Well, and it's funny too, because like not you, but the broker and the client hire someone to do repairs. And it's like as if, okay, so the attorney didn't have it on the closing, or who, for whatever reason, that all of a sudden it's like free work, right? Like it's an interesting concept that people have this idea that, well, it was on the closing disclosure, so I'm not paying it. Or the worst, and this has happened to me, like a tax bill scenario, right? If you're in the middle of that paying season right now, like we're kind of in at this point, toward the end of the year, that, okay, these lenders start kicking out those payments. Well, when you did the search initially and day of closing, when you did your update, it was still showing as due.
Yep, happened to me too.
But then all of a sudden, after closing, you're getting phone calls. Hey, wait a second, I paid this. I double paid tax bill. Who's going to pay me back? County's not going to write you a check back. So what do you do? And it's just the reality of, hey, there's a process to this. We'll work through it. And I also caution, this is a harsher reality. This is going more to like a housing affordability and concept and conversation of, is it the right time to buy a house? Because if you're freaking out over like $100 invoice, are you is it really the right time for you to be buying a house? Right. And this is
or in this price range, like you're exactly right. Yeah. Like if that's the tipping point, then maybe you're out of your budget or it's not a good time. I mean,
and I try to remember too, it's such an emotional process, because like you talk about the most heightened like scenarios for people. And in reality, it's not the transaction. It's not the closing attorney. It's not even a bad broker that's really making upset. It's everything else in people's life culminated together, the singular moment of signing a page.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, you're so right about that. It makes me think like, Ben Thomas used to always get so mad at the people being opportunistic. And trying to get out of something that was their responsibility. Mistakes happen. It is just a fact of life. There will be mistakes. But the thing is, like, he would always tell people, all I'm asking here is that you do the thing you were already contractually obligated to do. This is not costing you any more money than it was ever supposed to. Just do the thing that you agreed to do under the contract, and let's move on from this. But people would see it as an opportunity and be like, well, get to walk away, not have to pay.
Definitely.
So, 100%. And the thing about like the mountainside molehills, it might be an invoice. It might be something else that is very easily fixable. But, what do you really gain by amping everyone up? Nothing.
In fact, it does more harm because this is the one thing that I came to learn too in a very short time. You got to know the people and transactions because it's a small community. Even third party vendors, home inspectors is a small pool of people, right? Appraisers, even in reality, lenders, and the different mortgage representatives in the local marketplace. You learn the ones who are honest and have that integrity. Because a lot of times it's repetitious of, wait a second, every time we have a transaction with you, particular person, like this is happening every single time. And after a while, it becomes almost too much of like, don't go down that road of causing more trouble, because when you do that, your reputation in the community then starts happening, and that can be detrimental to your entire business.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know I've got my list of people that when I see them coming, I'm like, but then on the other side of that, there are people that I just am so excited when we get a deal from them because I know they'll be a joy to work with. They're going to take good care of their clients. It's like every profession. Now, the recording timelines.
Oh, you bring up the good ones today. Gosh.
Why is this, there are a lot of people that watch this or listen to this that aren't in North Carolina. And so it's different there. But in North Carolina, the rules are really clear. The law is really clear that until recording happens, no money is going anywhere and possession is not, buyer's not getting possession. So it's just so hard to get people to understand that just because they finish signing their paperwork, that it's not done yet.
Yeah, right. And you brought up the two main things, right? Sellers want the money, buyers want the keys. That's the name of the game at the end of the day for them. And in a contentious style marketplace that we've been in for years. I mean, and not every deal is contentious, right? But especially through COVID, I can only imagine what it's like right now, right? Being in the game. I couldn't imagine dealing with it. I probably would have pulled my hair out by now. But you come down to the wire on some of these transactions and people are just, again, that heightened emotional sense that's there. And it's like culmination of, I had to write the biggest check I've ever had to write just for due diligence, right? Or earnest money. And then the seller refused to do any repairs and all these things that when it comes all together, again, just such heightened emotions. And then you just have to tell someone it's Friday at 4:00. Sorry, seller says you can't have keys till it records and it didn't record in time. And so come back on Monday, we'll let you know, and you got the moving truck outside. But again, a lot of that could be solved with communication, managing those expectations as the broker right through the transaction. Because, yeah, someone may blame the attorney, but the attorney's office isn't in control of that stuff. And even the little control that you do have, even if you get a party that agrees, okay, we'll do a early possession, let's say, but wait a second, we need the attorney to draft a solid agreement. So if the house burns down, right, you get to these other layers of the onion that just, again, a heightened emotional sense and a tough situation.
It really is. And it can be a heartbreaker because if only people had been prepped ahead of time, like I'm sure yours was like this. Our engagement letter is like a black box warning just because you've signed your, we got checklists, like schedule your movers accordingly so that you don't have them waiting outside a house that you're not allowed to enter.
You probably have that in your engagement letter. You probably tell them that at the table. You probably remind that in the email process. And yet there's probably times when people still act like they didn't know that, right?
And it's tough when we have, we have some agents that are really good at prepping their clients, but when we have the agents that don't have our back, like they know this is their rule. They know that this is the law. And when their clients told them that they had the moving truck coming at 11 a.m. and their closing was at 10, they could have told them that instant you need to reschedule. Yeah. They knew that, like, we just need your help, Now, after we're saying we need your help, we also need you to stay in your lane or be in a lane. Yeah. Your perspective on this.
Yeah, so staying in the lane is definitely the more common of the two. And then I say that and I start thinking about, well, wait a second, we need actually brokers that participate in the lane. Not just brokers. Again, there's many other vendors in the transaction. But yeah, not speaking out of turn in essence. And one of the most common things probably related back to closing, like, seller, you can have keys at the table. Or if you're the broker and you're like, in your mind, you're, oh yeah, I can have the check at the table for my commission. That's a big no-no.
Yeah.
That's a big no-no in North Carolina.
Yeah. And don't tell me that so-and-so attorney in some small town did it. Okay, I want to continue practicing law for a long time. I'm not going to.
Now you give me the guilt of, do I have to report this broker? Because we're supposed to report as in the bar association, but who wants to do that? And it just becomes a whole thing. Yeah, unfortunately. So because somebody else is breaking the rules, you think I should, and all because, again, the average broker does 4 deals a year, right? And so for their livelihood and for, rent and everything else and all the other things that come into play, again, a heightened emotional sense, very heightened emotional. But then again, you've got some brokers who, and it was always funny when you had the ones that, I've been licensed for 20 years as a broker, but they've done no transactions and they come in or they're so disconnected from the transaction that they think their only rule is to find a buyer, put a contract in place, and then that's it. I'm out of here. I found a ready, willing, and able buyer, gave it to a ready, willing, and able seller. They came to terms and signed an agreement. My job as a broker is done.
That fiduciary word,
Yeah. There's some that actually believe that that's how it is or that what they interpret it to be, and it's just not right. So
you said something that made me think of another thing on our list. I've been doing this 20 years, but they have no idea that the contract's changed since 2018, or, like they're still circulating some super old version of the contract and they don't have any idea what's in the current one. Like, help us out. Know your contract. Know what's in it.
Gosh, that alone would alleviate so many complications. And I feel like it always came back, for whatever reason, a majority of the time, due diligence fees and earnest monies. Oh, I'm terminating. Do I get this back? Yeah. And in the brokerage community, it was very common to require, or at least the brokerage firm wanted, a signed termination, right, in order to receive back an earnest money deposit. But the contract doesn't require that. Yeah. The law doesn't require that. That might be a policy of a brokerage firm. But hey, if it's in the due diligence period and a buyer tells us as the closing attorney that they're terminating, well, here you go. Here's your earnest money back. I don't have to call the seller. I don't got to inform anybody. Yeah. And brokers and clients, they would flip their wig learning that was the real case. What do you mean that's what the contract says?
Now, one day after due diligence period, absolutely. Different game. Yeah.
Well, then you'd have those buyers too, right? Hey, I want to terminate. Don't tell the seller, give me my check. Sorry, I can't give you anything back. Yeah. In fact, when I'm looking at this contract, this is the seller's now.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. And that's, again, things that could be, like the contract, it's long, but it's not that complicated. If you really just take a second, review the language. I think North Carolina has done a really good job of trying to make things as clear as possible. And when they haven't been clear, they've revised to make it more clear. So we've got a contract that I know everybody hates that it's 17 pages or whatever it is now, but it covers so much information that if you go over that stuff with your client when you're signing the contract, surprises get eliminated.
And I wish it was going to get easier for you in the future, but here's where I think, this is my random prediction, this and $1.07 might get you a cup of coffee wherever you're at in the world. I don't know. So with the changes happening too, right? There's a lot of change. I'm sure you get a lot of calls about the NAR settlement, everything else going commissions related. So next is going to be the layer between, okay, do I have to be a member of national, state, and local? That's going to be a conversation as far as the Realtor Association. The standardized forms that we commonly refer to, Form 2T, for example, if you're in North Carolina, that's a realtor and NC bar form. That's not a broker form. There's no requirement that brokers use Form 2T. They've adopted it as a policy within their firms. I do think there will be a percentage shift away from a standardized form at some point here.
The different conversations I've been involved in seminars and things that I've been going to the last 3 months or so, completely agree with you. I mean, people are working on it right now to get their own. I mean, if I had to guess, you probably are having to draft some stuff. You can't tell me, but I'm sure. I agree with that completely. Now, lastly here, the lines of communication. When you communicate, to whom do you communicate? You know?
Yeah, that's a tough call because the interesting part about North Carolina too is that the North Carolina Bar Association says in a limited capacity, you can represent both the buyer and the seller in a transaction. For most states, that's blasphemy, right? And I think back to the days of old stories of new construction in particular, and being able, an attorney being able to represent a builder in a new construction plus then a buyer. That's really where a lot of that stems from, if I recall correctly. And I'm going down a rabbit. You got to repeat the question right now because you just sent me down a rabbit hole back to like my dad as a broker right now. Yeah, the communication side of things. It's hard because you want to communicate to everyone, but you necessarily can't communicate everything to anyone. Do you communicate to both the buyer and the seller side, hey, your lender just called, say we need to postpone closings for 2 days? Technically, everybody needs to be informed that closing or settlement is going to be delayed for a couple of days. But why is the lender even informing you as the closing attorney rather than the client, right? It's almost like this back and forth. And
because we become the hub. Right or wrong, we become the hub.
Yeah. I always tried to take it as whatever form and fashion it's communicated to me, I want to reflect that back. So for example, if it's a one-on-one from someone on the buyer side of the transaction, I'm going to keep that one-on-one with the buyer so long as I'm not violating something with the seller, and vice versa for a seller communicating something. Because there's certain things that like don't need to be known. Like for example, in a divorce scenario on a seller side, though as long as all the parties are signing and buyer's going to get all the rights, the buyer doesn't need to be made aware as far as how they're splitting proceeds or all those other types of maybe marital agreements that are taking place on the side.
Right.
So you got to create those boundaries at the same time while effectively communicating to everybody.
Yeah, I'm with you on all of that. I look at it like a team approach of, okay, if we got a buyer thing going on, let's tell the buyer team. Again, unless it's something that's like got to be private between, attorney and client. But
you
when
learn
it comes
a lot
to
about people as a closing attorney, the documents you see, I mean, you see a lot of things about people.
But as far as like, okay, the lender's telling us we got to reschedule, I need to tell the buyer team. Now, we often will take the approach of buyer agent communicate to the seller side that it's got to be rescheduled. Because, you just got to be careful. We got to be careful with what we say and to whom and how we do it. So it's one of those things of like, we're not necessarily shooting off a mass email to everybody that has touched this file. But I think a good rule to an agent is if you need to let somebody know something about your client, tell their team. Don't just, if you need to tell the lender something, but that also affects the attorney and also affects something else. If you didn't tell me yourself, don't assume that I've been told. That's my approach. It's like, all right, agent, I know you told the lender, but the lender didn't tell me. Assume I don't know unless you were the one that told me. Yeah. It's tough.
Keep being the voice of reason in the room too. I encourage you for that because it's hard to, but
It is. It's a treat to get to talk to an attorney that's not, in the practice with me. Because sometimes it feels like, am I going crazy? does this only happen to us? Are we doing something wrong here? Which we could be.
Usually there's other attorneys probably thinking that stuff in the same moment too. You know what I mean? I always wondered that
like, is this the Twilight Zone?
You're not alone.
So it's so validating to hear that, like, you know, you've run a successful practice and like had a lot of raving fans and you dealt with the same stuff too. It makes me feel so much better. Now I want to talk about, just because I think it might be relevant to the agents that are watching, hopefully they never deal with this, but if you defend people in licensing complaints, right?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so North Carolina had a big initiative years ago that on the front page of the Real Estate Commission's website, there is a button that says file a complaint. And they wanted consumers to be able to do just that. And when a complaint is filed against you with the Real Estate Commission as a real estate broker, the first step that the commission does is they look at the complaint on its face and they say, okay, we're going to assume everything on this page that has been submitted to us is true. And if true, did you as a broker violate license law or commission rule? And it's a very low threshold if you have to assume everything on the page is true. And just given the volume of transactions that I've seen, and still even with an active broker license and understanding from the broker's perspective, there's just such an immense value for brokers to have some level of representation, because losing your license is your livelihood for most people. My dad, I grew up in a family of real estate brokers. My dad was a broker my whole life. Had he, come across a crazy client and lost his license, thankfully he never did, but that could have happened. And for all I know, who knows what would have happened to our family. And so being able to represent brokers in that capacity has been a treat for me, and I enjoy that kind of nitty gritty level. A lot of fact-based kind of arguments, and it's a court setting without being a court setting. It's not official rules of evidence and things like that, so I can get a little outlandish, which makes it a little more exciting.
Yeah, you get to go and have your oral argument, but you don't like that. I always hated the rules of evidence, and
well, sometimes, to be honest with you, a lot of it has to do with these brokers will respond to the complaint, and then I'll get the call after the fact because there's multiple levels. So if they would just don't try to submit the response. Like, no,
you think you're helping, but you've undercut yourself. Because even though what you're saying might be true, the way you've said it makes you look worse. So here's the rule: call Justin first. Don't respond until you're called.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can make that a rule here. Well, I have enjoyed this so much. Thank you for taking the time to come on the Real Estate Show. I foresee you coming back if you want to. So
y'all are wild around here.
We'll plan for that to have you back soon. And I've just enjoyed it so much. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's an honor.